Russia is about to shatter into 19 separate countries, not in some distant future, but within this decade, and the process has already begun. Russia's population shrinks by 1 million people annually, while its war in Ukraine drains the economy through military overspending and sanctions. This creates the same institutional decay and elite conflicts that marked the Soviet collapse. We're not talking about wild speculation here. Nearly half of respondents surveyed by the Atlantic Council expect Russia to either become a failed state or break up by 2033. These 19 future nations aren't random lines on a map. They're based on real ethnic boundaries, active separatist movements, and brewing rebellions that Moscow is desperately trying to hide. Picture this: the diamond-rich Sakha Republic controlling an area larger than India, an oil-soaked Tatarstan with 4 million people ready to break free, the warrior Republic of Chechnya rising again, even a Buddhist nation called Tuva that was once already independent and hasn't forgotten what sovereignty looks like. But here's what makes Russia's fragmentation different from 1991. The fractures run straight through the core. Every single one of these future countries has a reason to hate Moscow, and they're all watching Russia bleed out in Ukraine, preparing for their moment of freedom. The signs of collapse aren't predictions anymore, they're facts on the ground. Before we dive into why this unraveling is inevitable, you need to see exactly what we're talking about. These aren't hypothetical future states. Most of these regions tried to break away before and were crushed by Moscow's iron fist. 5 new countries will explode from the North Caucasus. Chechnya, which actually achieved independence from 1991 to 2000 before Putin's brutal reconquest. Dagestan, Russia's most ethnically diverse republic with dozens of Muslim peoples who've never accepted Russian rule. Ingushetia, Circassia, and North Ossetia, each with their own burning desire for freedom. But wait until you hear about the Volga region. 4 oil-rich republics are sitting on some of the world's largest energy reserves. Tatarstan, which held an independence referendum in 1992 and came within inches of breaking free. Bashkortostan, with its own massive oil fields, and smaller republics that are already talking about forming an Idel-Ural Federation, a new country in the heart of Russia. The most shocking part? 6 entirely new nations could emerge from Siberia and the Far East. We're talking about Yakutia, nearly the size of India, rich in untapped diamonds, a Far Eastern republic that might end up a Chinese satellite state by morning. Even tiny Tuva, which most people have never heard of, was actually an independent country until Stalin absorbed it in 1944. And here's where it gets really crazy. 4 Western regions set to redraw the borders of Europe entirely, including Kaliningrad, poised to become Europe's newest country overnight. But the most mind-blowing revelation? Every single one of these future nations is already organizing. With the emergence of umbrella organizations, most notably the Free Nations League and the Free Nations of Post-Russia Forum, diplomacy became a major tool for Russia's independence movements. They're not waiting for permission. They're preparing for war. History offers a precedent. The Soviet-Afghan War destroyed Afghanistan and contributed to the dissolution in 1991 of the Soviet Union into 15 republics, while 7 European countries broke free from Soviet influence too. Sound familiar? Replace Afghanistan with Ukraine, and you're watching the exact same playbook unfold in real time. But here's the terrifying difference. When the USSR collapsed, it split along neat administrative lines that already existed. Now, the cracks run much deeper. We're not just talking about losing territories, we're talking about the complete disintegration of the Russian state itself. Moscow's Soviet Union became the Russian Federation, shrinking in size from 22.4 million square kilometers to 17 million square kilometers. While still the largest country in the world geographically, Russia now represents only 3.5% of the world GDP, and it's about to shrink again. The parallels are bone-chilling. A bloated empire gets bogged down in an unwinnable war. Military casualties mount. The economy buckles under the weight of defense spending. Back then, the state still had a buffer. Today, it has none. Unlike 1991, ethnic minorities across Russia are asking the same question. If Ukraine can break free from Moscow's control, why can't we? And they're not just asking, they're acting. Here's what Moscow desperately doesn't want you to know. Russia isn't really Russian. The indigenous ethnicity that gives its name to the republic is called the titular nationality. However, due to centuries of Russian migration, a titular nationality may not be a majority of its republic's population. But in key regions, the map is about to flip against Moscow's interests. Take Chechnya. In June 1991, the independent Chechen Republic of Ichkeria declared independence on the territory of the former Chechen Ingish Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. It actually existed until 2000. Consider this for a moment. Chechnya was already independent for 9 years. They had their own government, their own military, their own currency. It took Putin 2 devastating wars and tens of thousands of deaths to drag them back under Moscow's boots. But Putin is 72 years old. His regime is weaker than ever. Chechnya once stood alone, and they still remember how. Ukraine is the only country that openly supports separatist movements in Russia. Since the start of the war in Donbas, Ukraine allowed the creation of national battalions. Ukraine is also the only UN member that recognizes the independence of Chechnya, claiming that it's an occupied territory. The same explosive pattern repeats across Russia's ethnic republics. In 1990, the Tatar Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic issued a declaration asserting its state sovereignty and aimed to take part in the Soviet Union's transformation. But following the failed August coup of 1991, the republic's leadership pivoted toward full independence. That October, it adopted the Declaration of State Sovereignty and the Republic of Tatarstan. A referendum on Tatarstan's independence took place in March 1992. Tatarstan, with its 4 million people and massive oil reserves, came within a hair's breadth of independence in the 1990s. Only Moscow's bribes and threats kept them in the federation. Now, with Russia's economy in freefall and Moscow focused on Ukraine, those independence dreams aren't just stirring again, they're erupting. But you haven't heard the most devastating part yet, because what's happening to Russia's military right now is about to trigger the final collapse. Nothing destroys an empire faster than military humiliation, and Russia's performance in Ukraine has been an absolute catastrophe, tearing the country apart from within. The Kremlin's army has suffered more than 1 million casualties since 2022. Russia's heavily sanctioned economy is struggling and presumably fearing unrest. But here's the devastating detail that's driving ethnic republics toward rebellion. Alienated ethnic minorities have been disproportionately killed as cannon fodder in Ukraine, and dozens of separatist movements grow more rapidly than they did in 1991. Moscow has been using ethnic minorities as expendable troops. Buryats, Tuvans, Dagestanis, Chechens, they're dying in Ukraine at rates far higher than ethnic Russians, and their families back home are keeping score. The reality? While ethnic Russian boys from Moscow and St. Petersburg got deferments and fled abroad, minority soldiers from the republics were forced to the front lines. Some Buryats dream of full independence, others of reunification with Mongolia. When your sons are dying for Putin's imperial ambitions while ethnic Russians stay safe in the capital, independence starts looking like survival. The war in Ukraine isn't just bleeding Russia white, it's turning every ethnic minority into a potential rebel, and the economic numbers are even worse than the body count. Russians aren't just losing a war, it's going broke, and when Moscow can't pay its bills, it can't buy loyalty. The current signs show that Russia will face an economic recession in 2025, and Putin and the Kremlin will have to determine how to address these financial woes. For now, there is no clear strategy. The numbers are absolutely devastating. As of late 2024, Russia was estimated to lack 2.7 million workers, with inflation reaching 9.5%, and the central bank's key interest rate was at a record high 21%. The number of corporate bankruptcies in Russia increased by 26% in the first 3 quarters of 2024 compared to the same period of 2023, totaling 6,392 according to Russia Matters. Russia now spends over 40% of its federal budget on defense and security, while its civilian economy crumbles. The shift to a war economy has aggravated labor shortages and inflation. Bankruptcies are on the increase. But the true explosive part? Russia's regional governments are running out of money. Its budget deficit was $47 billion in 2022 and has risen to more than that in the first quarter of 2023. Revenues have collapsed, forcing it to slash services and subsidies to its hinterland. When Moscow can't pay the regional governors, when federal subsidies dry up, when local services crumble, that's the moment ethnic republics start asking, why do we need Moscow at all? Especially when they're sitting on oil, gas, diamonds, and gold that Moscow has been stealing for decades. Add to that, Western allies have frozen $300 billion or more of Russian foreign exchange assets that will be earmarked to rebuild Ukraine. Clearly, the center will not hold, and Russia, as currently constituted, is likely to unravel, even if the war ends and a new, less suicidal regime replaces Putin's. That's the moment Russia begins to die, and the demographic disaster ensures it stays that way. Even if Russia somehow survived the war, the ethnic tensions, and the economic crisis it faces an even more fundamental problem. Russians are disappearing. Russia's population has been shrinking by 1 million people annually. That's like losing almost the entire population of Estonia every single year, and it's accelerating. This decline disproportionately affects ethnic Russian regions, while the Caucasus maintains population growth, a pattern that intensifies ethnic and religious tensions, setting the stage for future conflicts. Now imagine the implications for the future. The Russian heartland is emptying out while the ethnic republics grow stronger. In 2 generations, Russians could be a minority in their own country, but the ethnic republics aren't waiting for demographics to solve their problems. They're preparing to leave right now. Now let's get specific about these future nations because each one has the motivation, resources, and organizational structure to declare independence the moment Moscow shows weakness. The North Caucasus explosion. This region has never fully accepted Russian rule, and 5 new countries are waiting to emerge. The counter-terrorist operation regime in Chechnya was canceled only in 2009, but almost the entire North Caucasus continues to fight against the federal government. In addition to Chechnya, which was fighting for independence, there are movements for at least autonomy in Dagestan, Ingushetia, North Ossetia-Alania, Kabardino-Balkaria, and Karachay-Cherkessia, according to Babel. Chechnya leads the pack with 1.5 million people who've already experienced independence, but Dagestan is the real wild card. According to AALEP, Dagestan separatism can refer to the idea of an independent united Dagestan or disunited independent states, such as Agulistan, Avaria, Lezgistan, Dargistan, Lakistan, Rutukstan, and Tabaristan. Depending on how things unfold, we could see one big Dagestani state or multiple micronations. The Volga-Ural treasure chest. 4 oil-rich republics that together control massive energy reserves. Tartarstan is the crown jewel with 4 million people and a history of independence movements. Modern Bashkir separatism began in the 90s and was influenced by Tatarstan. These 2 could form the core of a new Turkic confederation. Then there's the Idel-Ural option, a proposed multi-ethnic federation. It would unite smaller republics like Chuvashia, Mariel, Udmurtia, and Mordovia under a shared future outside Moscow's shadow. Their flagship movement, Free Idel-Ural, envisions creating a multi-ethnic federal state. One expert describes this as potentially creating Urzian Master, Land of Urzia, movement, which claims the territories of Republic of Mordovia, Penza, Ulyanovsk, Nizhny Novgorod, Ryazan, and Samarra Oblast. The movement wants to create a federative state with a moksha autonomy. The Siberian breakaway. 6 massive territories that could reshape Asia. The primary cause of Yakut separatism is economic exploitation by the federal government. Yakutia, Sakha Republic, home to the world's richest diamond reserves in a territory almost as big as India. With only 1 million people controlling those resources, they could be one of the richest countries per capita on Earth. The Far Eastern Republic is a proposed state within the border of the entire Far Eastern Federal District, including Sakha and Buryatia. The separatists see the proposed republic as a revival of the Far Eastern Republic. Beijing would see this as their playground, a massive territory with ports on the Pacific that China would love to influence. Here's something most people don't know. Tuva was once independent. This tiny Buddhist majority republic was actually an independent country until Stalin absorbed it in 1944. Independence isn't a fantasy, it's a memory. The Western breakaways, 4 regions that could fundamentally reshape Europe's borders. Kaliningrad, that isolated Russian exclave, could declare independence overnight and seek EU membership. Currently, the idea is supported by the Free Ingria movement and Ingria Without Borders movement, which are represented in the Free Nations of Post-Russia Forum. Even St. Petersburg could break away as the Republic of Ingria. But here's what makes this absolutely certain to happen. These movements aren't operating in isolation anymore. According to the BESA Center, before 2022, ethnic movements functioned separately from one another, and their limited international outreach was mostly confined to activists in linguistically related countries, such as Estonia in the case of the Mari movement and Turkey for the Tatars. Everything changed when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Now we have umbrella organizations, most notably the Free Nations League and the Free Nations of Post-Russia Forum, coordinating independence movements across the entire Russian Federation. These aren't college debate clubs. These are serious political organizations with international backing. As reported by the BESA Center, in November 2024, the Supreme Court of Russia declared the forum a terrorist organization. In January 2025, Russia's Federal Security Service updated its list of terrorist organizations accordingly. When Moscow starts labeling independence movements as terrorist, you know they're scared. These organizations are doing exactly what the Baltic states did before the Soviet collapse, building international connections, coordinating strategy, and preparing for the moment when Moscow's grip finally slips. If you're finding this analysis as shocking as we did when researching it, make sure you've subscribed with notifications on, because what we're about to reveal about the external powers positioning for Russia's collapse will completely change how you see global politics. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. But here's the part that terrifies every intelligence agency on Earth. Russia has thousands of nuclear weapons scattered across those same regions that want to break free. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there was a mad scramble to secure nuclear weapons spread across Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. This time, the stakes are exponentially higher. Russia deploys around 1,720 warheads on roughly 590 strategic delivery systems, according to Federation of American Scientists estimates from early 2025. But that's just the strategic arsenal. The Pentagon estimates Russia has an active stockpile of up to 2,000 tactical nuclear warheads, much larger than America's 100 tactical nuclear weapons deployed in Europe. These smaller nukes are spread across military bases throughout Russia, including in regions that could declare independence. Here's where it gets absolutely terrifying. Some of these nuclear facilities are located in the exact regions we've been talking about. The Kola Peninsula, home to Russia's Northern Fleet nuclear submarines, sits in the Russian northwest. The naval base at Kamchatka Peninsula in the Far East is reportedly being upgraded by 2025 to eventually homeport nuclear submarines. Even the Strategic Rocket Forces, which command Russia's land-based nuclear missiles, have units spread across Siberia. Now, imagine this scenario. Chechnya declares independence and finds itself in control of tactical nuclear weapons stored at nearby military bases. Or picture the Far Eastern Republic emerging with nuclear submarine facilities under their control. What happens when 19 new countries suddenly have potential access to the world's largest nuclear arsenal? In November 2024, Putin approved amendments to Russia's nuclear doctrine, signaling a lowered threshold for nuclear first use. The doctrine now permits nuclear weapons use against non-nuclear threats that create critical threats to sovereignty and territorial integrity, according to ussr. When ethnic republics start declaring independence, will Moscow consider that a threat to territorial integrity worth a nuclear response? This is why every major power is secretly preparing for Russia's collapse. It's not just about redrawing borders. It's about preventing the world's largest nuclear arsenal from falling into the wrong hands during the chaos. Russia's disintegration won't happen in a vacuum. Every major power is already positioning for the biggest geopolitical feeding frenzy since World War II. China has been building an influence in the Russian Far East for decades, and they're not going to let this opportunity slip by. Beijing will likely support separatist movements in Siberia while moving to secure nuclear sites and resource extraction deals. The Far Eastern Republic could become a Chinese puppet state overnight. Turkey has been playing the long game with Russia's Turkish minorities. Turkish businesses have already invested over $2.5 billion in Tatarstan's economy, more than any other country, including Russia itself. When Tatarstan and Bashkortostan declare independence, Turkey will be their first international supporter. NATO faces the ultimate strategic dilemma. They want Russia weakened, but they don't want nuclear chaos on their borders. Expect Western powers to support independence movements in regions like Kaliningrad and Ingria while working frantically to secure Russia's nuclear arsenal. But the most shocking external factor? Ukraine is the only country that openly supports separatist movements in Russia. Kiev is already training ethnic minorities fighters and has officially recognized Chechnya's right to independence. When the shattering begins, Ukraine won't just be watching, they'll be actively supporting it. So how does the world's largest country actually fall apart? If Putin were to leave office, it is likely that a vicious power struggle would follow and, in turn, a disintegration of centralized control and breakup of the Federation, according to Newsweek. It starts with a power vacuum. Putin dies or is overthrown in a coup. Moscow erupts into a vicious power struggle between different factions: the security services, the military, and the oligarchs. While the center is paralyzed by infighting, regional leaders in the ethnic republics see their moment. Chechnya declares independence first. They have the military strength, the international recognition, and the burning motivation. Within hours, as in Chechnya, so too in Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, and Tuva, the desire for autonomy explodes into action. The dominoes start falling across the Caucasus and Volga regions. Moscow tries to respond militarily, but their best troops are dead in Ukraine. Their nuclear forces are commanded by officers with divided loyalties, and half the country is in open revolt. Some regions declare neutrality. Others pick sides in the Moscow power struggle. We don't know who will win, but we can definitely predict that the power struggle will weaken the regime and distract Russia from what remains of its war effort. If Russia survives this turmoil, it's likely to become a weak client state of China. If it does not, the map of Eurasia could look very different. Within weeks, Russia as we know it ceases to exist. The fragmentation of Russia into 19 new countries wouldn't just redraw the map, it would fundamentally reshape global power for the next century. The world would obviously be better off if Moscow's monstrous dictatorship no longer controlled 1/10 of all the land on Earth and nuclear arsenal. A fragmented Russia means the end of the nuclear threat to Europe. These new countries would be too small and too busy establishing themselves to threaten their neighbors. China would become the clear winner, gaining influence over resource-rich Siberian republics. But Europe gains security, the United States gains a weakened rival, and millions of oppressed ethnic minorities finally gain their freedom. Some regions with cohesive societies will begin to demand more autonomy or simply exit. The most likely candidates to leave will be regions on Russia's periphery that, like the former Soviet republics, have identities, leaders, and reasonable economic prospects. The issue is not whether Russia will break up, but when and how. Will it become a messy, violent Yugoslavia situation, or more likely simply fall apart without violence as did the Soviet Union? Unlike in 1991, the ethnic fault lines run deeper. The economic crisis is more severe. The military humiliation is more complete. In 1991, Ukraine and the former Warsaw Pact satellites left easily because they were independent nation-states before they were acquired by the Kremlin after the Second World War. The exit of the 15 former Soviet republics, such as Ukraine, the Baltics, and Central Asia, also left easily because they were already semi-autonomous nation-states. The ethnic republics inside Russia are following the exact same playbook, and now they have international support, economic resources, and military experience from the Ukraine war. All the trends point to the same conclusion. Putin's empire is living on borrowed time. The question isn't if it will shatter into 19 new countries, it's when. Based on every historical precedent, every economic indicator, and every military disaster in Ukraine, that when is coming sooner than anyone in Moscow wants to admit. These 19 future nations aren't just possibilities, they're inevitabilities, waiting for their moment to emerge from the ashes of Putin's failed empire. Not in 50 years, not in theory, but in real time. The empire that once stretched across 11 time zones is breaking, not with a bang, but with 19 quiet cracks echoing from the edges. And in every corner, the future is already speaking its own language. The countdown to Russia's fragmentation has already begun. The only question is whether the world is ready for what comes next. What do you think? Will Putin's empire survive the decade, or are we about to witness the birth of 19 new nations from Russia's ashes? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Fall of Nations for more analysis of the world's shifting power dynamics.